The lights around the mansion were bright enough to turn night into day. Music flowed through the wide garden, soft but confident, the kind that made people feel important just by standing near it. Expensive cars lined the long road leading to the gates. Men in fine suits and women in shining dresses laughed, held glasses, and spoke about deals, travels, and power. Cameras flashed near the entrance as guests arrived one after another. This was not just a party. It was a statement. Inside the mansion, the man who owned it all moved from group to group with calm control. He smiled when required, nodded when needed, and listened without truly hearing. He had built his life on focus and discipline. Every success around him came from years of careful choices. Tonight was meant to be a celebration of everything he had achieved. Yet, even with the praise and attention, something inside him felt unsettled. He ignored the feeling at first. Feelings were distractions. He had learned that long ago. Still, the unease stayed, quiet but firm. Like a soft knock on a door he refused to open. Outside the gates, far from the music and warmth, a girl stood barefoot on the cold ground. Her clothes were thin and worn, clearly not meant for the night air. She hugged her arms close to her body, trying to keep warm. Her hair was messy, her face tired, but her eyes were alert. She did not beg. She did not shout. She simply stood there and watched. She had been on the streets for a long time. Long enough to learn when to move and when to stay still. Tonight, something had pulled her here. She did not fully understand why. She only knew she needed to see what was happening behind those tall iron gates. The lights, the laughter, the sense of safety. It felt like a world she once knew in stories, not in life. Security guards noticed her quickly. One of them walked toward her with firm steps. "You can't stay here," he said. Not unkindly, but with no room for discussion. She nodded slowly. "I'm not causing trouble," she replied. Her voice was calm, almost careful. "I'm just waiting. Waiting for what?" the guard asked. "For someone," she said. The guard sighed. He had heard many stories before. He pointed down the road. "You need to leave. This is private property." She did not argue. She took a step back, but did not walk away. Instead, she leaned against a tree near the gate, keeping her eyes on the mansion. The guard watched her for a moment, then returned to his post, assuming she would leave soon. Inside, the man lifted his glass as someone made a toast in his honor. The crowd cheered. Applause filled the air. Yet, as he raised his glass, his hand trembled slightly. He frowned and set it down. A strange thought crossed his mind. He felt watched. He turned toward the large windows facing the gates. From where he stood, he could not see the girl clearly, only a small figure near the entrance. For a brief moment, their eyes seemed to meet through the distance and glass. The feeling in his chest tightened. He turned away quickly, annoyed with himself. He told himself it was nothing. Just a long night, too many people, too much noise. Back outside, the girl's legs began to shake. Hunger, cold, and exhaustion pressed down on her all at once. She had not eaten properly in 2 days. Still, she refused to sit or lie down. She felt that if she stayed awake, something important would happen. As more guests arrived, some noticed her. A few whispered. One woman looked at her with irritation, pulling her coat tighter, as if the girl's presence alone was uncomfortable. Another guest laughed softly and shook his head. One of the younger servers paused near the gate, holding a tray. He looked at the girl for a moment longer than the others. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded again, though her face said otherwise. "I'm fine," she replied. He hesitated, then slipped a small piece of bread from his pocket and handed it to her quickly before walking away. She accepted it with both hands, surprised. She did not eat it right away. She held it as if holding proof that kindness still existed. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The cold grew sharper. The music felt farther away. The lights blurred. Inside the mansion, the man felt his discomfort grow stronger. He excused himself from a conversation and walked toward a quieter corner. His assistant approached him. "Everything is going well," the assistant said. "The guests are impressed. The press is happy." The man nodded but did not smile. "Who is that outside?" he asked suddenly. The assistant looked confused. "Outside, near the gate," he said. "There's someone standing there." The assistant glanced through the window. "Probably a homeless girl," he replied casually. "Security will handle it." The man said nothing. A memory stirred in his mind, unclear but persistent. A young woman from years ago, a promise made in a small room, a future he had walked away from when ambition called louder. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. Outside, the girl finally took a bite of the bread. Her hands trembled. As she swallowed, her vision darkened. The world tilted. She tried to take a step forward, but her legs gave out. She fell near the gate, hitting the ground softly but not waking. Someone shouted. The guards rushed over. Guests nearby gasped. The music stopped suddenly, leaving an uncomfortable silence in its place. Inside the mansion, the sudden quiet caught everyone's attention. The man turned sharply toward the entrance. "What happened?" he asked. A guard spoke quickly. "There's a girl outside. She collapsed." The man did not hesitate. "Bring her inside," he said. The assistant looked surprised. "Sir," now he repeated. The gates opened. For the first time that night, the line between the two worlds disappeared. The girl was lifted carefully and carried into the mansion, her presence breaking the perfect image the party had been built to show. As she was brought in, the man watched closely. Something about her felt familiar, heavy, important. The party remained silent, every guest watching as the girl crossed the floor. Unaware that her arrival had already changed everything, the girl was placed on a soft couch inside the mansion, her body shaking from cold and exhaustion. She blinked slowly, her eyes adjusting to the bright lights that seemed to come from everywhere. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe, though the unfamiliar surroundings made her nervous. She had spent years learning that people could be kind one moment and cruel the next. Trust was something she had kept locked away. The billionaire stood a few steps away, watching her closely. He felt an odd pull in his chest. There was something in the way she held herself, the curve of her lips when she blinked, even the small scar near her temple. All of it seemed familiar. A name whispered somewhere in the past that he had tried to forget stirred in his mind. Guests had gathered near the entrance, curious about the sudden interruption. The music had stopped entirely. A few whispers spread through the room, questions about who she was and why the party had paused. Some looked impatient, others concerned, but the man ignored them. This was no longer about appearances or status. Something much larger was at play. A young maid approached with a warm blanket. She gently wrapped it around the girl, who shivered despite the soft fabric. "It's okay," the maid said softly. "You're safe now." The girl nodded faintly. She wanted to speak, to explain herself, but her voice seemed too far away, trapped under years of fear and silence. Instead, she just watched the people around her, noticing the expensive shoes, the shining jewelry, the way everyone seemed too busy to notice the small, trembling human in the corner. The man moved closer, crouching slightly so he would not appear too intimidating. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked gently. The girl hesitated. She had not been asked her name in a long time. Names were often used to control, to claim, but something in his voice made her pause. She whispered her name, unsure if it was safe to speak. When he heard it, a jolt of memory went through him. The name, so small and ordinary, carried weight he had not expected. He leaned back, trying to steady himself. His mind raced through old letters, old photographs, promises he had ignored. It was impossible. Yet every sign pointed to the same truth. "Where are your parents?" he asked, his voice tight. The girl's eyes grew wet, though she did not cry yet. "I don't have any," she said softly. "Not anymore." The man's heart sank. He could not remember ever feeling so helpless despite having everything. He wanted to reach out, to hug her, to make it all right, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? Years of absence, years of not knowing, could not be fixed with apologies. I might know someone who can help," he said finally, keeping his voice calm. "Would you like some water?" She nodded, taking the glass he handed her. Her hands trembled as she drank. The water was cold, refreshing, and familiar in a strange way. It reminded her of moments long ago when she had felt a small amount of care from someone who meant well. The billionaire's assistant approached quietly, lowering his voice. "Sir, the guests are growing restless. Some are upset." He waved him away, almost angrily. This was not about the guests. It was never about them. He turned his attention back to the girl. She looked tired but alert. She did not speak much, only responding when spoken to. That was fine. He did not want to rush her. "Where have you been living?" he asked carefully. "On the streets," she admitted. Her voice was steady, despite the weight behind it. "I've learned to survive." He swallowed hard. He had heard of hardship, read about it, given money to causes, but never had he truly felt it, never had he seen it up close. Never had he seen it in the eyes of someone who looked so familiar and yet was a stranger. He wanted to reach out and hold her hand, but he was afraid. Afraid of scaring her. Afraid of the truth. She noticed him looking at her differently than others. Most people either ignored her or looked down. But him? He seemed confused, even haunted. That made her suspicious. People who acted confused often had hidden agendas. She had learned that long ago. "Why are you helping me?" she asked finally. Her voice was small but firm. He paused. He had no immediate answer. He wanted to say something true, something that would not make her leave, something that would explain the strange pull he felt. I don't know yet," he admitted. "But you deserve help. You shouldn't have to be out there alone." She studied him carefully. There was sincerity in his eyes. That was rare. It's very rare. Slowly, her body relaxed a little, though she kept her guard up. It would take time to trust, and she had learned that patience was survival. A doctor had been called. The girl had been so weak that she needed a checkup. As the doctor examined her, the man observed quietly. He noticed the lines of her face, the subtle movements of her hands, and again, the strange sense of familiarity. He had never felt so drawn to someone, yet so afraid. "Do you have any family at all?" he asked again. She shook her head. "I've lost everyone," she said. Her voice carried a sadness that made him flinch. He had always been able to control his emotions, but now he felt powerless. The party had nearly stopped completely. Guests whispered among themselves, some annoyed, some curious, all uncertain. But he did not care. The world outside the room did not matter. What mattered was the small, fragile human sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Barely holding herself together, he moved closer again, keeping a careful distance. "Can you tell me a little about yourself?" he asked. Her eyes flicked to him. She wanted to be careful. She did not know him, yet there was something in his voice, something that made her consider it. Slowly, she began to speak about her life on the streets. The cold nights, the hunger, the people she had met, the kindness she had rarely received. Her story was simple, yet powerful. Every word carried a lifetime of struggle. He listened, silently absorbing each sentence. Each word cut through him. How could someone so young endure so much? How could he have been blind to the possibility that this girl existed somewhere alive and suffering? Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The girl, exhausted but not fully asleep, leaned back, her head resting slightly on the couch. He remained nearby, unsure of what to do next. He wanted to speak, to explain, to fix, but he did not know where to start. How could he undo years of absence? How could he make her understand that he had not forgotten, even if he had been gone? Finally, he said, almost in a whisper, "You are safe here. I promise." She looked at him for a long moment. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hope, but hope had hurt her too many times before. She nodded slightly, just enough to show she heard him. That was all he needed for now. The night outside continued, but inside the mansion, a quiet understanding began to grow. No words could explain it yet. No gestures could fill the empty years. But something had shifted. Something had begun, and for the first time that night, both of them felt a connection that neither could fully explain. It was the beginning of something uncertain, fragile, but real. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, creating patterns on the polished floor. The girl had spent the night in a soft room with blankets and warmth, a luxury she had long forgotten existed. She woke slowly, stretching stiff limbs, and rubbed her eyes. The memories of the streets still clung to her, like shadows she could not shake. The billionaire had been awake early, too. Sleep had not come easily after the night before. He paced quietly in his study, a cup of coffee untouched in his hand. His mind replayed her face over and over. He could not stop thinking about the way her eyes had carried both defiance and vulnerability. How her presence had unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He finally made a decision. He needed answers. The fragments of memory that had stirred the night before her eyes, her expression, the small scar needed to be checked. He needed to know the truth. He asked his assistant to find any information that could confirm his suspicions. Medical records, birth records, anything that could connect him to this girl. He felt nervous, a sensation he had not experienced in decades. Even his wealth and power could not remove the fear that what he might find could change everything. Meanwhile, the girl explored the mansion quietly. She had not been spoken to by the staff as though she were dangerous or insignificant. They treated her with care, which puzzled her. She could not understand why a world so rich and privileged would bother with someone like her. She walked through the hallways, touching the walls as if to make sure they were real. Noting the paintings, the furniture, the floors that gleamed like glass. Breakfast was brought to her. Simple, but enough to satisfy her hunger. She ate slowly, cautious, observing everyone around her. The billionaire entered, his presence calm but commanding. He did not approach too closely, giving her space while showing that he was there, watching, waiting. "Did you sleep well?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes, thank you." Her voice was still soft, but there was a hint of mistrust. "I've slept in many places. This one is different," smiled faintly, acknowledging her words without pressing further. Instead, he asked gently about her health, any injuries, how long she had been on the streets. Each answer she gave pulled him deeper into the realization that she had lived through unimaginable hardships, yet carried herself with strength he had not anticipated. By mid-morning, the results had started to come in. The documents and medical tests were being reviewed in a private office, and the man waited anxiously. Each piece of evidence felt like a thread connecting him to a part of his past he had tried to forget. Letters he had ignored, promises he had made and broken. Memories of a young woman he had loved now, all pointed toward this girl. The assistant returned quietly with a folder. He handed it over with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. "Sir, these documents. They confirm what you suspected." The billionaire opened the folder slowly, scanning the pages. The birth certificate, hospital records, and early photographs left no room for doubt. The girl sitting in the next room, unaware of the discovery, was indeed his daughter. His own child, who had survived the streets while he had achieved everything else in life. He felt a wave of guilt and shame that struck him harder than any financial loss or public failure ever could. Memories surged back years ago. A young woman he had loved, a child he had promised to care for, a choice he had made to walk away in pursuit of wealth and power. All of it rushed forward now in a painful tide. He realized that money had bought him everything except what mattered most: family, love, and trust. He wanted to reach her immediately, to explain, to hold her, to beg forgiveness, but he paused. She did not know the truth yet. How could he tell her without scaring her away? How could he make up for years of absence with mere words? The weight of regret settled on his shoulders. Meanwhile, the girl had grown restless. She wandered near the large window that overlooked the garden. The sun felt warm on her skin, but she was restless inside. Her mind kept returning to the life she had left behind, to the harsh nights, to the small kindnesses she had encountered, like the bread the server had given her, the blanket, the soft voice of the maid. She realized she was not completely alone, not for the first time in years. The man called her gently. "Could you come here for a moment?" She turned cautiously, unsure of his intentions. Something about him felt different now, not like the strangers she had encountered on the streets. Slowly she approached, her movements careful, her gaze alert. He pointed to a chair and motioned for her to sit. "I need to tell you something. Something important." Her heart raced. She did not know if she was ready for truth, for explanations, for promises. She nodded, bracing herself. "I have discovered something," he said softly. "Something that may change how you see me and yourself." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What is it?" she asked, trying to remain steady, trying to read the truth in his tone. He swallowed hard. "You are my daughter." The words hung in the air. She froze. Her mind spun. She had never imagined such a possibility. Could this man, this stranger who had saved her from the cold night, really be her father? She had no one. No family. And suddenly, the truth felt almost too heavy to bear. I don't understand," she whispered. "You can't be." I don't even know you." He nodded, understanding her shock. "I know. And I have no right to expect you to believe me or trust me right away. I left when I shouldn't have. I ignored my responsibilities. And now I am trying to make it right, but I know that words alone are not enough." Tears pricked her eyes. Anger, confusion, fear, and a small spark of hope all collided within her. She wanted to push him away, to protect herself from more disappointment. Yet a part of her could not deny the truth in his voice, the sincerity in his eyes. He reached slowly, not touching her, only extending a hand as a gesture of peace. "I cannot bring back the years we lost," he said softly, "but I want to be here for you now, if you will let me." She looked at him, measuring his words against the countless disappointments she had faced. Her mind raced with questions. Why had he left? How could he be so certain? Could she trust him when trust had been broken for so long? Finally, after a long pause, she spoke. "I don't know if I can trust you yet," she admitted, "but I will listen." He nodded, relief washing over him, though he knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. "That's all I ask for now," he said. "Just that you let me try." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in thoughts that spanned decades. Outside, the party continued, but inside, a private world had formed. A world where mistakes could not be erased but could be acknowledged, where forgiveness could begin and where two lives, separated by circumstance and choice, had finally started to intersect. The day stretched on, and the man made careful arrangements to ensure she had everything she needed. Clothes, food, medical care, and a safe place to rest. Simple things he had never realized carried so much weight. He kept his distance, allowing her space while still observing, learning. Understanding, she explored the mansion further, finding small comforts she had never known. Books, a soft bed, warm water. She began to see that perhaps life could be different, that not all people in the world were cruel or careless. Yet the shadow of doubt remained. Could she believe that this man, wealthy, powerful, and long absent, could truly care for her? Could she risk hope when hope had always hurt? As evening approached, he prepared to speak again. He wanted to tell her more about the past, to explain the circumstances that had led to their separation, but he knew it had to be slow. Too much at once would overwhelm her. He needed to be patient, to rebuild trust, brick by brick. The girl sat near a window, looking at the fading sunlight. The colors of the sky reminded her of nights on the streets, when the stars were her only companions. She felt a strange mix of nostalgia and relief. Something had shifted inside her. She did not know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she could be cared for, where she could belong. The billionaire watched her quietly, understanding that nothing about this would be easy. He could not undo the past. He could not erase her pain. But he could be present. He could try. And for now, that had to be enough. And so, in that quiet room, with sunlight fading and shadows growing longer, two lives connected by blood, but separated by choices, began the delicate work of finding each other. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring, but they both knew that this moment, the first recognition, the first step toward truth, was the beginning of something neither had expected but both desperately needed. The night had returned to the mansion, but it was no longer the same as before. The music had stopped hours ago, yet the crowd remained, buzzing with curiosity and confusion. Guests whispered, moving in small groups, unsure how to react to the interruption. Some tried to appear calm, some tried to ignore the girl who had caused the commotion, but their attention could not be fully diverted. The air felt heavy, charged with unspoken questions. The billionaire walked through the large hall, his posture steady, but his mind racing. He had spent the entire afternoon with his daughter, learning small details about her life, hearing her stories, and listening to her doubts. Every answer she gave, every hesitation, was a reminder of the time he had lost. He knew that tonight he could no longer stay behind closed doors. The truth needed to be faced publicly. He stood near the grand staircase, his eyes scanning the crowd. Guests were still murmuring, some exchanging worried glances. The press had noticed the unusual shift in the atmosphere, cameras now quietly trained on the room. He took a deep breath, steadying himself for what he was about to do. Clearing his throat, he raised his hand to get attention. Slowly, the crowd quieted, sensing that something serious was about to be said. The sound of his voice filled the hall, commanding without raising its volume. "There is something I need to tell you all," he began. His eyes, however, were not on the guests, they were on her, the girl who sat wrapped in a blanket near the side of the room. "This girl," he continued, pointing gently toward her, "is someone very important to me. Someone I have failed in the past." Gasps swept through the crowd. Some guests exchanged startled looks. Others whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of the statement. The girl looked up at him, fear and confusion mingling in her eyes. She had expected honesty from him in private, but now it was public, and her heart pounded. He took a deep breath. "She is my daughter," he said firmly. "I made mistakes. I left when I should have stayed. I ignored responsibilities that were mine. I cannot undo the past, but I can begin to make it right now." The room fell silent. Even the staff stopped moving, caught in the gravity of the moment. The guests, some shocked, some sympathetic, realized that the billionaire had exposed himself, his failures, and his humanity. This was not a show, not a public relations maneuver. It was raw, painful truth. She blinked, struggling to process the words. Could this really be true? Could this man, who had lived in a world she could hardly imagine, be her father? Her life on the streets, the absence of family, the nights of hunger and fear, all of it collided with the possibility that he was telling the truth. She wanted to believe, yet a small part of her trembled with doubt. He moved closer, carefully, not to crowd her. "I understand if you are angry. I understand if you do not trust me. I have no right to demand forgiveness. I only ask for a chance to be part of your life from this moment onward." She swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "Why now?" she asked softly. "Why tell everyone?" He looked around at the guests, the staff, the press, and then back at her. "Because the truth should not be hidden. Because you deserve to be acknowledged not just in private, but in the world that has ignored you. Because I am trying to be honest, even if it is hard, even if it makes others uncomfortable." Tears pricked her eyes, threatening to fall. She wanted to run, to escape from the overwhelming attention, yet she also wanted to stay. She wanted to hear more, to know that this was real. The sincerity in his eyes gave her hope, though it was fragile. Some guests whispered behind their hands. A few shook their heads, seeming to think the billionaire was showing weakness. Others, however, nodded subtly, recognizing the courage it took to admit mistakes publicly. To face one's own failures, he continued, voice steady, eyes never leaving hers. "I have tried to build a world full of success and recognition. Tonight I have learned that nothing is as important as family. I cannot erase the years we lost, but I can promise that from now on, you will not be alone. You will not have to face the world by yourself again." The girl's hands trembled as she reached for the blanket around her shoulders. The mixture of emotions, anger, disbelief, hope, and fear made her heart beat wildly. She wanted to speak, but found no words that could adequately express what she felt. Finally, she whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know if I can believe you yet." He nodded, understanding completely. "That is fair. You don't have to. Trust is earned, not demanded. I am here, and I will not leave again. I will prove it to you, not with words, but with actions. The room remained still, the guests waiting, sensing the weight of the moment. Slowly, some of them began to clap softly. Others nodded in quiet support. The atmosphere shifted from confusion to a form of respect. They were witnessing something deeply human, a moment that transcended wealth, status, and appearances. He walked toward a quiet corner, gesturing for her to follow. She hesitated but took a step, then another. She stayed near him, not out of obligation, but out of a cautious curiosity. She wanted to understand him, this man who claimed to be her father, who had lived a life so different from hers, yet somehow shared her blood. For the next few hours, they spoke privately, sharing memories and questions. He explained the circumstances that had led to his absence, the young woman he had loved, the choices he had made, and the regrets that had haunted him. She listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes silent, trying to piece together the fragments of truth that he offered. I understand if you hate me, he said softly. I would hate myself if I were in your place. She looked at him, her eyes wet. I don't know if I can forgive you, she admitted, but I want to understand. He nodded. That was enough for now. Understanding was the first step toward healing. Forgiveness could come later if it ever did. The important thing was that they had begun to rebuild a connection, fragile and delicate but real. Outside the room, the party had slowly resumed, though the atmosphere was different. Conversations were quieter, laughter more subdued. People moved with caution, aware that something profound had taken place. Some guests left quietly, unable to process the emotional weight. Others stayed, feeling humbled and reflective. The billionaire and his daughter moved through the mansion together, not holding hands, not rushing, simply being present in the same space. She explored the rooms, noticing details she had missed before the photographs. The shelves of books, the small things that spoke of a life she could have had. He answered her questions with patience, offering explanations without overwhelming her. By the end of the night, a fragile trust had begun to take root. She understood that he was sincere, that he truly wanted to be part of her life. He understood that her heart was cautious, scarred by years of absence and hardship. They both knew the journey ahead would be long, filled with challenges, doubts, and emotions that could easily overwhelm. As the mansion quieted and the guests departed, they sat together near a large window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and uneasy at the same time. Neither spoke, yet neither needed to. The connection had been made, the first step taken. And that was enough for now. The billionaire placed a hand lightly on the armrest near her, careful not to overstep. She looked at him, then at the city outside, and for the first time in years, allowed herself to feel a sense of possibility. A life that had seemed impossible, a family that had been lost, could perhaps be reclaimed. And in that quiet, shared moment, both of them understood that the world had shifted. The mistakes of the past could not be undone, but the future uncertain, fragile, and full of challenges was theirs to navigate together. Weeks passed since the night that changed everything. The mansion, once filled with grandeur and laughter for appearances, now held a quieter, more personal energy. The girl had started to settle in, though the transition was far from easy. She was learning to trust, to feel safe, and to navigate a world that had once seemed unreachable. Each day brought small victories and challenges. Moments of laughter mixed with the occasional tears. The billionaire was patient, careful not to overwhelm her. He had realized that wealth and power could not replace the years of absence. His actions needed to show consistency, care, and respect for the boundaries she had developed over years of survival. He helped her with practical things at first: food, clothing, and healthcare, then slowly began to introduce her to a life that had always existed outside her experience. She explored the mansion more freely now, finding comfort in the small, personal spaces that felt welcoming. There were books she could read, art she could touch, and music that played softly in the background. Each discovery was new to her, and each moment of learning brought a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She was cautious, Aware that happiness had always been fleeting in her life, they spent long hours talking, sitting together in quiet corners or walking through the gardens. He shared stories of his own childhood, carefully omitting the parts that could intimidate or confuse her. She asked questions, some practical, some emotional, each one slowly peeling away the layers of distrust she had built over the years. He answered with honesty, never trying to sugarcoat mistakes, never pretending that the past could be erased. One day, he suggested something she had never experienced, a walk through the nearby park. The sun was bright, the air fresh, and the world felt different outside the walls of wealth. She hesitated at first, unsure of how to navigate the attention that would come their way. But he stayed beside her, quiet, supportive, giving her space to move at her own pace. People passing by noticed the girl, some recognizing her from news reports of the event at the mansion. A few stared, but she kept her head high. The confidence of someone slowly learning that they belonged somewhere finally emerging. The billionaire walked with her, not forcing interaction, simply present as a protector, as a guide, and as a father who had finally returned. Inside the mansion, routines began to form. Meals were shared at predictable times. Schooling or education was introduced carefully, respecting her previous experiences and her comfort. Slowly, she began to understand that life could be structured, predictable, and safe. She was learning that the world was not entirely cruel, that some people genuinely wanted to help without ulterior motives. He continued to make subtle changes, setting up programs and opportunities for children and teenagers who were in situations like hers. She watched as he worked tirelessly, seeing that his wealth could be used to create tangible, meaningful impact. These actions spoke louder than any apology, showing that responsibility and care extended beyond just their own lives. Some days were difficult. She would retreat into herself, haunted by memories of hunger, loneliness, and betrayal. He learned to recognize the signs, the way her hands trembled, the way she avoided eye contact, the silence that spoke volumes. On those days, he did not push. He offered a comforting presence, a quiet word, or a gentle gesture, letting her process in her own time. Over time, small milestones marked progress. She laughed more easily, smiled without fear, and even began to ask questions about her past and his. She wanted to understand the choices he had made, the reasons he had left, and the person he had become. And he answered with honesty, patience, and humility, never expecting instant forgiveness, only offering understanding and a chance to rebuild trust. There were moments when she questioned whether she could fully belong in this new life. The luxury, the comfort, the attention, it was all so foreign. But he never forced her to conform. He encouraged exploration, allowed her to make choices, and respected her independence. Slowly, she learned that belonging did not mean losing herself, that safety did not equal surrender. Family dinners, quiet evenings, and shared activities began to create a sense of normalcy. He involved her in decisions, asked her opinions, and treated her as a partner in their new life together. The mansion, once a symbol of status and wealth, became a place of connection, learning, and growth. One afternoon, they sat together in the garden, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. The girl leaned back, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the presence of someone who finally cared. Someone who could not undo the past, but was committed to the future. She felt a fragile hope take root. Understanding that healing was not instant but possible. "I never thought I could feel safe," she admitted quietly. "Not like this." He smiled softly, placing a hand near hers without touching. "I know," he said, "and I cannot promise it will always be easy. But I can promise I will be here, and I will do everything I can to make sure you never feel alone again." The trust that had seemed impossible weeks ago was slowly building, brick by brick. They began to share more of themselves, stories of fears, dreams, and hopes. Each shared moment was a step toward reclaiming what had been lost, toward creating a bond that had been missing for too long. Outside the mansion, the world continued as it always had. But inside, a transformation had taken place. A homeless girl, once invisible to the world, had been seen, acknowledged, and cared for. A man who had once measured success in wealth and influence had learned that the greatest achievements could not be counted in money or accolades, but in love, trust, and family. The journey ahead would continue to have challenges. There would be days of doubt, moments of fear, and reminders of the past that could never be erased. But the foundation had been laid. They had found each other not just in name or blood, but in presence, understanding, and shared experience. As the evening fell and the mansion glowed softly with lights, father and daughter sat together in quiet companionship. Words were not always needed. The simple act of being together, of sharing space, of existing in a world that now felt welcoming, was powerful enough. They had begun the work of healing, of building a future that neither could have imagined. And in that moment, hope was no longer a fragile dream, but a tangible possibility. And so, life continued, perfect, uncertain, but filled with the promise that the past did not have to define them. The mistakes, the losses, the years of absence, they were part of their story, but they were no longer the only parts. Now, there was a chance for connection, for understanding, and for love that could grow, slowly but surely, into something lasting and true.